Well, good afternoon, fellow constitutionalists, and welcome to the Monday edition of the Dan Clements Show, a Christian political talk show. I'm your host, Dan Clements, your constitutional warrior, fighting for your right just to be an American. It is September 18th in the year of our Lord 2017. Remember, we're a hyphen-free, PC-free zone. God is still in control, and He does love you. And I'm broadcasting live from the Hemlock Studios here in beautiful central Susquehanna Valley in the great Keystone State. Hopefully everything's working here. I just got to check to make sure my feed's coming through. Yep, it's coming through on the YouTube. Hopefully the volumes are very well or very good, as it were. I'm going to do one more thing here. All right. Oh, waiting. Got the furnace in last Friday. Everything's working good. The gauge... The gauge doesn't read volume below 10 on the tanks. I've been worried all weekend that my gas would run out. So far it hasn't. It sounds like maybe they might be outside now. I'm not sure. I'll find out after the show here. But they assure me I'm not going to run out of propane. And that's my only worry, is keeping the house warm. I had a pretty good weekend. I'm sorry for the folks down in Atlanta who did not have a very good weekend at all. And it's amazing to me how a major U.S. airport can't or doesn't have their own backup generators. Now, I worked in the Navy. I was an engineman in the Navy, worked on diesel engines that were hooked up to generators, great big 2,000 kW and 1,500 kW generators on the subtender I was on. A lot of the aircraft carriers have emergency backup as far as electricity goes, and those are run by diesel generators. So even on aircraft carriers, they do have some room for enginemen. And also the naval air stations around the world, in the U.S. and around the globe. I was actually looking at going to Perth, Australia as an engineman, and I'd have worked at the emergency generation plant for the diesel. So it amazes me how these huge airports, they don't have backup electricity. Something about a substation blew, and I don't really want to get into that as far as that goes, but I just want to give a kudos to Chick-fil-A. Now, Chick-fil-A in the past has gotten a lot of negative press because of the owner's stance on abortion. He's anti-abortion, he's pro, family values. So that makes him, that he's against gay marriage. And Chick-fil-A and the owners come under a lot of criticism. They're not open on Sundays. They figured, and I've always thought this way myself too. They figure that if they can't make their money in the first 6 days of the week, Sunday isn't really going to matter to them, and they'd rather their employees have the day off, be with their family, be able to go to church and worship God, and do other things like that. So this was posted this morning, but this happened yesterday. Chick-fil-A breaks its own rule to save the day during Atlanta airport blackout, and this is why I just want to give them a little bit of praise at the top of the show here. On Sunday, Chick-fil-A further cemented itself as America's most beloved fast food franchise. In response to the nightmarish Atlanta airport blackout, the massively successful franchise broke its own rule about keeping the doors closed on Sundays and fed the masses. Sunday night, the city of Atlanta notified the thousands of passengers whose flights were canceled amid a chaotic blackout at the airport that Chick-fil-A would be providing food for those taking the shuttle service to the Georgia International Convention Center to stay overnight. The city of Atlanta has mobilized the Georgia International Convention Center and will provide shuttle services for anyone who needs a place to stay for the night. Chick-fil-A will provide food for passengers. The city of Atlanta announced on Twitter the blackout, which lasted until afternoon and well into the night. Lasted all afternoon and well into the night, was caused by an underground fire. Resulted in hundreds of flights being canceled, with some passengers reporting being stuck on the planes on the tarmac for hours. Responses online to the announcement that stranded passengers would be getting Chick-fil-A on Sunday were predictably entertaining. A few examples, and I don't want to get into those too much here. I can actually go over to the story here on the city of Atlanta. Let's see. if I don't, one of them was, if I don't need a place to stay but want some of that Chick-fil-A. Well, heard I moved to South Florida after growing up in Atlanta. I'm thinking of making the drive for this. There was a lot of funny. Let me get this over there. There were a lot of funny replies to this. Wait, Chick-fil-A on Sunday? These people have no idea how lucky they are. Nice to see humanity at its best, offering a good deed in a stressful moment for so many passengers. Chick-fil-A on Sunday is a miracle on Peachtree Street. And you know what? This is something too that I just want to put forth here. You know, because Chick-fil-A does, you know, get a lot of flack from liberals and progressives out there in the country. It was more important, and I believe this is a biblical principle, it was more important for Chick-fil-A to step in and help these stranded folks at least get some hot food in their bellies than it was to take Sunday off. Just like the shepherd who lost his one out of 100 sheep and went looking for it, or when Jesus talked to the leaders of the Jews of the day, you know, he said, which one of you on the Sabbath, which would be a Saturday, on the Sabbath won't loose your animals to go out and feed in the pasture and stuff like that? Or if one stumbles into a hole, you won't go on the Sabbath to rescue them? You know, and they were complaining about Jesus Christ performing miracles on the Sabbath. And to me, this is a good example of a corporation stepping up and doing the right thing during a crisis. And like I said, I want to give them kudos, you know, for that. And to tell you the truth, as far as chicken sandwiches go, we don't have a Chick-fil-A locally here. We got to drive. Well, I think Williamsport's the closest one. And I wish we'd get a Chick-fil-A down here, because their chicken sandwiches are fantastic. Their wafer fries are just out of this world. My mouth's watering just thinking about them. And they are a really good franchise. Their people care about the customers. And here's a corporation, to this guy that I've been going back and forth with on Twitter, who complains about corporations exploiting employees. We were going back and forth on the free market principle. Well, how does the free market protect employees? And I even told him, so, well, you assume the employees are being exploited. You know, but in America, folks have a choice where they want to work. And if they have to move to work, and I did, they move to find work. You know, there's choices. You know, now free market brings that, not government. You know, and it never ends with progressives. They just, you know, corporations are evil. You know, and here's a perfect example of a corporation. Chick-fil-A is a corporation who, you know, broke their own rule. The government didn't force them to be closed on Sundays. Used to have the blue, what they call the blue letter or blue book laws or blue chip laws down south, one of those. And I remember when I was in the Navy in Charleston, South Carolina, unless you sold food, you weren't open on Sundays. And that was a government enforced prohibition. So Chick-fil-A, this is a self-imposed day off. But when they saw people in need, they jumped in and helped. And that's what, honestly, folks, that's what Christianity is all about. And I don't know if I can give a better, Bible lesson for this morning other than what Chick-fil-A did by coming out on Sunday and giving food to these people, you know, and helping them out when they needed it, you know, and just didn't sit in their ivory towers and complain about how evil corporations are and how bad things really are with corporations, which they aren't. And there's always a few bad actors that the free market would take care of if the government would just let them. Matter of fact, and this isn't what the show's about, but we were talking about this all last week with net neutrality. Progressives have the wrong idea about what crony capitalism is. They think crony capitalism is corporations getting together and colluding and messing over the customers and their employees and everybody else that comes in contact with them. And that's not what crony capitalism is. Crony capitalism is when there's a partnership between corporation and government, and you both use each other. Obviously, the government uses the business as far as corruption to get, to enrich themselves monetarily, and the corporation gets to use the government to stifle competition. That's crony capitalism. If corporations get out there and collude, which that's honestly, folks, that's so rare, it's hardly ever heard of, except in the minds of progressives, that to bring up those examples, again, these progressives want to govern on the margins. And there's always going to, in every sector of life, there's going to be bad actors, including in these sexual harassment, this Me Too movement that's going on in America today. Me too, I was sexually harassed or sexually assaulted by somebody. And I'm not trying to, want to be careful here. I'm not trying to take away from actual sexual harassment. But if you have consensual sex and in the morning you feel bad about it, okay, especially college students, if you feel bad that you really shouldn't have done that, it doesn't mean that it's rape. If it started off being consensual to begin with, and there was no safe word used or no nose put out, and they're finding in this 3%, and we talked about this months ago, this 3% of accusations being false is false in and of itself. It's closer, the reports I talked about a couple months ago, it's closer to between 40 and 45% of the sexual assault and sexual harassment on campuses now. Between 40 and 45% are falsified, and then they broke it down, between, what actually is sexual harassment versus, hey, you look nice, can we get a cup of coffee somewhere? A lot of third wave feminists think that's abuse, or that's harassment. That a guy goes up and compliments a woman and wants to take her out for a cup of coffee or something just to get to know her. Yeah. And I titled the show today, Innocent Until Proven Guilty, guilty until proven innocent. And I have some good articles here. I have an article by Daniel Greenfield over at Front Page Mag called Guilty by Association is the New Norm. And the roaming millennial ran into this when she interviewed, he was a white supremacist, one of the major ones. It'll come to me after a bit, but and this wasn't even going to be part of the show, but she was accused of being a white supremacist because she interviewed a white supremacist on the show and let him talk and didn't really get after his views and stuff. And she even said that her purpose wasn't to get after him as far as his, ideas and what he thought about race and stuff like that. She just wanted to get it straight why he was doing what he was doing, why he thought the way he thought, and people thought she could be more challenging. So again, she's a white supremacist because she associated with this gentleman in the white supremacy movement. And Spencer, is it Robert Spencer? Spencer's his last name. I knew it'd come up at least the last name. So she was guilty by association. And it seems to me that there's a lot of this going on, and I'll read the article about this, but there's a lot of this going on in America today, that folks are just guilty by association. And it reminded me of a story that I shared with you folks back in August of 2016, well over a year ago. It was called Beware of Kafka Trapping by Wendy McElroy. And I'll read this article a little bit here too, because this we need to refresh our minds about this. And one of the things with Kafka trapping, and Wendy will bring us out in the article, is if you start apologizing for something you didn't do, that's the trap. And one of her suggestions in the story was that if someone brings up false accusations against you, you need to be quiet and tell them to prove it. You know, give you the evidence. You know, show me the money. Put your money where the mouth is. Where's your evidence of this? Put the onus on them. Put the burden of proof on the accusers. Because far too often now, and I'm like chuck full of stuff. I've been wanting to talk about this all last week, some of this all last week and maybe the week before, but net neutrality has taken front and center on the Dan Clemens Show. And by the way, it's been 4 days since the repeal of net neutrality, and I'm looking here. Let me look over at my YouTube here. My stream's good. Everything's working well on that. I'm streaming fine. Everything looks good on the live stream. It's actually working. So the internet hasn't melted down yet, folks. It's been 4 days. The internet hasn't melted down yet. I'll try to give you a weekly update to let you know if the internet has melted down or not. And I'm also working on some individual videos about net neutrality and some other stuff I found out that just the pro-net neutrality folks probably don't want anybody to know about, to be quite honest with you, because some of the stuff I found is pretty damning to their position. But this whole thing with the guilt by association, the sexual harassment charges being used against innocent people to settle scores and gain power. This is what happened on Tucker Carlson's show, and this is by Craig Bannister over at cnsnews.com. And I watched a couple different episodes where they had these women on there, this one lady on there, and I didn't put the links down here, but I think he has the links up in the article here, where the woman that he was interviewing said women don't sexually harass men. It's not done. It's not, that's not the way it works. And that was a blanket statement by her, and Tucker tried to knock her off that point and make her explain that, and she just would not come down off of that. And lo and behold, I have an article here. I don't know if we're going to get to it, by Lindsay Wise and Brian Lowry over at McClatchydC.com. Kansas Dem drops out of race after sexual harassment allegations. And this was a Democratic woman. And the one thing you don't know, the one thing you forget about are all these teachers over the years that have been put in jail and fined and arrested and everything like that for having sex with an underage student, male student. That's a form of sexual assault. Especially with the young boys, because honestly, they don't know what's going on. They really don't. They may say they do, but they don't. I was a teenage boy, quite a while ago, but I still remember my teenage days, and I didn't know what was going on. And that is, someone of authority taking advantage of someone's ignorance. So it's this guilty until proven innocent has always been in the public, the court of public opinion. But our judicial system works the opposite. They're innocent until proven guilty. And for whatever reason, there are a lot of reasons for why this actually happens in the court of public opinion. But for the most part, it's just downright ignorance. It is. It's just downright ignorance that this happens in the court of public opinion, because people want the sensational. And for whatever reason, there's a vast majority of Americans out there, I wouldn't say an overwhelming, but I'd say there's a majority of Americans out there that want to see bad things happen to people. They want to believe the worst in people. And that's sad. That's a sad commentary on our society. It's a sad commentary where you have these third wave feminists out there saying that all women should be heard, which I agree with. But the second part of that they never talk about is heard and believed. And I just go back to the Ronaldus Magnum, or Ronaldus Magnus, one of his rules of life: trust but verify. Okay, take down the statements of the young ladies or the older women. Take down their statements. Try to find out if there's any type of physical evidence and investigate it. Investigate it. Because if sexual assault allegations on campuses are false 40 to 45% of the time, and that can ruin, these false accusations that are never investigated and the women are just believed and the man that's involved or men that's involved are drummed out and their lives are pretty much ruined. And then when it comes out years later that they were falsely accused, we never hear a whole lot about what happens to these accusers. Now, there was a story on One American News Network over the weekend that there was a young lady in Texas that falsely accused somebody of sexual assault. I don't know if it was out and out rape or sexual assault or whatever it was. They come to find out she was lying about it. She actually is spending some prison time because they break laws, especially if it goes to court. And this one actually went to court. She was making false statements, which is perjury, and that is punishable by imprisonment. She was making these false statements and stuff, and she literally ruined this guy's life. And this guy has sued her. There was another case that they actually reported. It was like an expose that they were doing. There was another case where this lady was falsely accused this guy, and the man actually brought a civil case against her and won like a multi-million-dollar settlement through a civil case. And they couldn't find her for a while, and here she moved out of state, went down south somewhere, changed her name, got a new identity and everything all on her own just to avoid having to pay this civil suit. So don't, like I said, there's a lot on the feminist side of the equation that, oh, women don't do this. That's a bunch of horse hockeys, pucks. So I always assume people are innocent until they're proven guilty. I always give people the benefit of the doubt until they prove me differently. I always trust but verify, and that's not being gullible. I think that's being wise, and I think that's the best way to go. And Dave makes a good point here. If the Bereans verified the inspired teachings of the apostles, surely it's worthwhile to verify these uninspired accusations. Absolutely. Absolutely. An inspired apostle that is moved by the Holy Spirit, that is speaking the Word of God, not his own words, was being investigated by the Bereans to make sure that what he was saying was according to inspired teachings. And a good preacher, if you're in a church and you have a pulpit preacher, a good preacher will not be afraid of someone examining his sermons and making sure what he is saying is according to God's Word. And folks, even though it was part of God's plans, it was false accusations that nailed Jesus Christ to the cross. He willingly went to the cross, but it was false accusations before Pilate and the Sanhedrin that put Jesus where he needed to be. Some people may think that's a contradictory statement, but Jesus needed to be on the cross, and it was through false accusations. And this is one of those 10 commandments that actually survived the Old Testament. Don't bear false witness. We have this in our own laws, our own code of law in America. It's bearing false witness, perjury. Under oath. You're swearing under oath and you make a false statement. That's called perjury. And so I think way too often our society, and I believe social media has something to do about this. I have quit reposting news items that I can't verify. If it's something sensational, I'll go check it out. If I can't verify it by independent sources other than and this makes me laugh. I go on to not so much Mother Jones, but Huffington Post is one of the worst ones, and I think Slate and Salon do the same thing, but maybe not to the extent of Huffington Post. When you check links, it goes back to another story that they actually wrote. So you go into that story, read that story, check out the references that they put in that story. It goes to another Huffington Post story. It never goes outside of the it never goes outside the Huffington Post. And so I always take those type of stories with a grain of salt, because especially if I can't go out and get independent verification of what they're saying. And so hopefully this is the way I want to be treated. I want to be treated as I'm innocent until you prove me guilty. I don't want to be in the court of public opinion or the court at all. You're guilty until proven innocent. You know, and honestly, I was caught up in the court system over in Scotland, and that's exactly. You do not come into court with the presumption of innocence. You come into court, they view it that you're here standing before the bar of justice, you're guilty, and you got to prove your innocence. It's not up to the state to prove your innocence. It's up to, and it's not up to the state to prove your guilt because you're there. And I always thought that was kind of strange. And when years later, when I thought about it, when I was over here, I was like, man, I'm glad we live in the United States. Because that's not always the case in other countries, that you're before the law. In the United States, at least, you're innocent until proven guilty. In the state, it's on the burden of proof is on the state to prove your guilt. And this is where, again, I see a lot of Kafka trapping going on here with this Me Too movement. And with any of these progressive movements, what makes me saddest, and it doesn't make me mad, it just makes me sad, that they're going too far with this, and they're actually going to hurt actual women and men who have been sexually abused. They're going to drive them back into the darkness again. And and that's what happens with a lot of these progressive movements out there. It really does. It really does. Today's show, it's not being brought to you by, but Rocky Mountain High Brand is my official drink of the Dan Clement Show. It is a 16-ounce can of carbonated drink, and they use natural ingredients, and it's also infused with 100 milligrams of hemp oil. And it does seem to help with my fibromyalgia pain. They have power shots, they have energy drinks, they have lemonade without the energy drink, and they also have just regular caffeinated iced tea. That's not as much caffeine as the energy drinks. They got power bars, they got Eagle Spirit water, they got the whole shebang. Now, right now on the East Coast, the only place you can buy this is on Amazon.com. And eventually, hopefully when they get the bottling plant up in the Catskills, south of Albany, up and running, we might start seeing some of this in our stores here on the East Coast. But this is the official drink of the Dan Clement Show. And full disclosure, I do own stocks in Rocky Mountain High Brands, part of my retirement portfolio. Dave asked a good question here, but I'll get to that when we get back into the rest of the show here. Today's daily Bible reading comes from Micah chapter 5, verse 2. But you, Bethlehem of Ephratah, through you, though you are little among the thousands of Judah, yet one of you shall come forth to me, the one to be the ruler in Israel, whose goings forth are from old, from everlasting. And this was a prophecy of Christ where he was going to be born, in Bethlehem Ephratah. And this is, again, there's hundreds and hundreds of prophecies that Jesus Christ fulfilled by coming to this earth and dying on the cross for our sins. Today's quote meal comes from George Mueller. Be assured, if we walk with him and look to him and expect help from him, he will never fail you. And he's talking about God here. Really good Bible lesson. I encourage you guys to go read this. It's by Al Shannon over at Biblical Proof, and this was posted yesterday. Are we changing sinners, or are sinners changing us? That's a good question, especially from an elder's standpoint, about protecting the flock and making sure that they're feeding on the pure Word of God and not denominational heresies that are going on all around us. So are we changing sinners? Are we bringing the gospel to the sinner, not gospels, the gospel to sinners, and allowing the gospel, the power of the gospel, to change their lives, or are we allowing sinners in their lives to change us? Really, really good question. All right, let me get over and get this set up here. Guilt by association is the next article we're going to read by Daniel Greenfield at frontpage.com mag, or frontpagemag.com, excuse me, I got them reversed there. Dave makes a point here. Ozzy Osbourne was accused of sexual harassment. Do groupies get to sue the one they're following for 40 years later? And I didn't say this, and I've actually been watching some news about this on One American News Network, Fox News, and some other ones, where some women are questioning these actresses who are coming out and saying I was sexually abused or sexually harassed, when they themselves, now maybe they were the only ones that did it, I don't know, but when they themselves thought that they'd use their looks and their body and their sexuality to try to further their career in Hollywood. Now, I'm not saying all actresses do this. I would never say that. I don't even know what the percentage would be, but you know, this makes a lot of sense to me. And if someone came out and actually admitted this, you know, I just have to wonder how widespread that actually is. And then maybe, you know, this Me Too, some of these actresses, you haven't seen them for years. You know, they're B and D actresses now. You got to wonder. You know, just like Dave brings up this point here about rock and roll groupies or country western groupies that are following these men and are just falling in love with these men, and they follow them around for I don't know how many years. Do they, you know, do they get to sue that person because they're the one following them? They're the one throwing themselves at them. Again, this whole thing is getting convoluted because, let's go back to Judge Roy Moore. These accusations, each and every one of them, and we talked a little bit about this 2 weeks ago, and their stories were falling apart back then, that these accusations were false. Yet in the court of public opinion, pushed by the opinion pushed by the lamestream media and held by progressive Democrats, was we're going to do anything. Scorched earth. This is a Clinton-esque tactic. You know, if you can't win on your merits, then you go in and you scorch the earth with personal attacks. And this all sort of goes into the theme what I'm talking about here today, when people like on Tucker Carlson's, they're using sexual harassment charges to settle scores and gain power. And there's a video I encourage you to go watch, Stefan Molyneux and Michelle Malkin. Now this was back in February of this year, but it came up on one of my recommended videos on YouTube when I was watching other videos about feminists and sexual harassment. And I watched this, and Michelle Malkin was investigating some things, and you know, she was coming up with this idea that these folks are guilty until proven innocent. And when I read something like that, that just scares me. I mean, that gives me chills like you don't believe. Because you're talking about an individual going up against the system. You're talking about an individual going up against the system with the presumption of guilt already instead of the presumption of innocence that needs to be proven by those that are bringing the accusations. And again, I can't help but go back to think about, you know, beware of Kafka trapping. Beware of Kafka trapping. And Dave makes a really good point here too. And I just want to put this out here. People need to think ahead and avoid situations which can lead to temptation and sin. Well, Weight Watchers doesn't hold meetings at Dunkin' Donuts because of the temptation. You can cut down on potential accusations in the future. I think he's going to say. I think he ran out of words there. But yeah, you know, Alcoholics Anonymous does not hold their meetings in bars. Potential sexual harassment by dressing right, acting right, avoiding alcohol and drugs, etc. We need to think and act responsibly. Exactly. And this goes back, and Dave will remember this. This goes back to, and Mike Pence, Vice President Pence, Mike Pence. I cannot believe the backlash he got on Twitter and social media for saying that he does not hold meetings by himself with women that aren't his wife. And as far back as I can remember, as a member of the Church of Christ and the different congregations I've been in, that has been a standing rule for the preachers and the elders, that we do not counsel. Elders, deacons, preachers do not counsel. If you're a guy, and you would be in the Church of Christ, we do not counsel women without a second party involved. And usually, and this has been, now, not necessarily this is a good or bad thing. With me, I've always made it a rule, if I am meeting with another woman, that I either have my wife there or I have another lady in the congregation that I can trust to be there, to be a witness to everything that's going on. I'm never, ever taking a meeting alone with another woman who's a member of the church or someone who's outside the church. Just ain't going to happen. Because like Dave said, if we don't put ourselves in those situations, it's never going to come up. But that doesn't stop people from, that have a political agenda. It doesn't stop them from making false accusations. There's nothing you can do. There is nothing you can do to stop someone from making false accusations. But the way you conduct your life, the way you conduct yourself, can go a long way in your defense against these accusations. If I'm of the habit, and I am, if I'm of the habit, if I have to counsel or sit down and, someone that has a point of scripture they want to sit down and study with me, if it's somebody of the opposite sex, I do have I always want another woman in there. I don't want another man in there. I want another woman in there. And that's just my personal preference. And sometimes I have, if my wife can't be there, sometimes I'll have another married couple, the husband and wife there with me, and I'll ask the person I'm counseling or teaching, whatever, if it's okay I bring these people in there, and I'll explain to her why. I'll give her an explanation why I won't meet with her privately by myself. And even sometimes as an elder, sometimes right after church or something like that, a woman wants, when I was an elder, they had a question, want to take me aside, and they want a little privacy, as they say over in England. We would step into the preacher's office, but that door was never, ever closed. Never closed. Especially if it was something quick. They had a question or something, but they didn't want to, they wanted it private. We could go in the preacher's office, which was right behind the auditorium. That door was never, ever closed. And those are the type of policies that you need to have, and people see those. And then if they see these false accusations come up and say, no, Dan doesn't do that, or Dave doesn't do that, or so-and-so doesn't do that. I've been involved in counseling or lessons with this man, and he's never alone with a woman that's not his wife. And I applaud and praise Mike Pence for doing that, because he's doing the right thing. He's honoring his commitment to his wife by making sure that he can be accused of nothing. And that goes a long way in the court of public opinion, folks. It really does. Now I don't want that one. Now this article here, Guilt by Association by Daniel Greenfield over at frontpagemag.com. Daniel Greenfield is a Shillman Journalism Fellow at the Freedom Center, is an investigative journalist and writer focusing on radical left and Islamic terrorism. Time is named Me Too, and you got to see real quick here, you got to see the front page article, this Guilt by Association. Person of the Year by Time is Me Too. Now, I don't know about the writers of Time, but usually a group isn't a person. Unless you're a corporation, but we're not talking about corporations here, okay? Time has named Me Too its Person of the Year, and every other day the hashtag lynch mob drags someone else in front of the spotlight. The accusations range from rape to harsh words. The evidence is hearsay. The target is shamed, fired from every job he ever had, and purged from polite society. Some are guilty. Some might be innocent. But we'll never know because there's no investigation. The time frame between accusation and purge is hours or days when it takes your average HR department a week to file a form. Just like in every totalitarian leftist state, the accusation is enough. This is what Bill Clinton did. This was a Clinton tactic that, we have to investigate the accusation, whether there was anything to investigate or not, just like we're going through with the Russian probe. But the accusation was brought up. We have to investigate Russian collusion with the Trump campaign. It's been over a year and there's nothing. Matter of fact, the more Mueller digs into it and releases, the more it looks bad for Hillary Clinton and the Democrats and a couple in the Republican Party, yes. But should that smear Donald Trump and his campaign? I don't think so. But in a leftist totalitarian state, the accusation is enough. And if they were alive today, over in Nazi Germany, if you were accused of a crime against the state, harboring Jews or whatever went against the state, the accusation was enough. It was enough. And that's what sends chills down my spine. And then it's on to the next one. There's nothing American about Me Too. It's the revolutionary justice of the leftist purge where random political violence against ideological enemies is used to heal social ills. If there's poverty, shoot a few rich men. If there's unhappiness, string up some priests. If there's sexual assault, destroy whichever names are passed along by a few influential but enigmatic figures. Ronan Farrow, Yashir Ali, with ambiguous backgrounds and agendas through pressure campaigns and aimed at their employers. And don't ask any questions. Only bad people ask questions. Only bad people want proof. Only bad people don't instantly believe an accusation. And you're either with Me Too or you're its targets. Either you're for me or you're against me. Either you're for it or against it. Okay? But maybe we should start asking a few questions. 6 years ago, I was stopped by a reporter and asked if I believed a rape victim. Dominique Strauss-Kahn, the head of the International Monetary Fund, who was likely to be the next president of France, had been arrested for sexually assaulting a hotel maid. Local tabloids and cable news quickly descended on the case of the suave, powerful man who had assaulted a refugee hotel maid who had been gang raped in her own African country. The French reporter also accosted me, asked me if I believed the victim. He wanted to know what Americans thought should happen to Strauss-Kahn. I told him that in this country we put people on trial and put all the facts before we punish them. France didn't wait for all the facts. Dominique Strauss-Kahn's political career ended. Sarkozy became the next president of France, and there were always rumors that the whole thing had been a setup by his political opponents. And there's a link there. I didn't get to that link in there, but there's a link there. Nafisato Diallo, that's his last name, the hotel maid, had managed to lie convincingly about almost everything. She had even lied about soldiers in Ghana gang raping her and what she had done right after the attack. Finally, prosecutors gave up. In virtually every substantive interview with prosecutors, despite entreaties to simply be truthful, she had not been truthful. They wrote about their own witness. The nature and number of the complainants' falsehoods leave us unable to credit her version of events beyond a reasonable doubt. She lied. Like many of the accused men, Dominique Strauss-Kahn appeared to have little control over his appetites, but his reputation had been destroyed based on an accusation. And an accusation alone should not be enough to destroy a person. In the longest and most expensive trial in American history, members of the McMartin family were prosecuted for satanic child abuse. The Los Angeles case dragged on for 16 years. The whole thing proved to be groundless. During the Iraq War, Hillary Clinton, Al Franken, Rachel Maddow and many other leftists championed the case of Jamie Lee Jones, who worked for a Halliburton subsidiary in Baghdad's Green Zone. Jones claimed she had been gang raped by her fellow employees. After 6 years, the case completely collapsed. The University of Virginia Pi Kappa Psi fraternity won millions from Rolling Stone after being vandalized and harassed because of the magazine's recent rape hoax article. Jackie, the woman in question, had made the whole thing up, but by then the witch hunt had already been unleashed. That's why believe all women is a terrible idea. Not all accusers, men or women, can or should be believed. Some men and women do lie, either because they have something to gain or because they're psychologically unstable. A court-appointed psychiatrist determined that Jones suffered from narcissistic personality disorder and faked injuries for sympathy. Jackie appeared to be a compulsive liar who later blamed PTSD. Everything we know about human psychology tells us that people do lie. They will lie for profit or revenge. They will lie to get attention and because they are troubled or because they're troubled. And even when they aren't lying, their grasp of reality can be shaky. Memory under the influence of strong emotions becomes erratic. And history tells us that mass lying does occur in moral panics like the Salem witch hunt trials. That's why we determine guilt based on an investigation and evidence, and the Me Too lynch mob's evidence can be surprisingly shaky. Take the recent forced resignation of Representative Franks. Political described sources relaying an account by a former staffer about Franks getting another female aide to read an article about falling in love. That's not evidence. It's a third-hand accusation that didn't even originate from the supposed victim. The difference between a lynch mob and a court of laws is evidence. Lynch mobs don't believe that victims can lie or that perpetrators can be innocent. They don't believe that the justice system can be trusted. They don't just want to punish. They want to terrorize as a tool of social improvement. This is exactly what the Me Too suffers from. Me Too doesn't care much about evidence. Its mantra is believe all women. The evidence against some of its targets is overwhelming and others non-existent, but it demands that we believe them all equally because oppression is an ideological truth that doesn't depend on the facts in any given case. Now let me stop the reading there. Get back to this oppression thing. This is what progressives get wrong about government. And this whole Me Too is a far left, liberal, progressive ideology. You know, that all women need to be believed. And trust me, I tell you, I've known some women in my life, acquaintances, thankfully not friends, that couldn't tell the truth if you printed on a piece of paper and had them read it. They couldn't tell the truth. And this thing about oppression, they don't understand how this Me Too movement is actually the one causing the oppression. Because of their ideology that all women should be believed, that the accused is guilty until proven innocent instead of the other way around. There's no investigation being done for the most part before the public mob gets a hold of things and just trashes people's lives. And by the time it's all over, and if it's a false accusation, the damage is done. And I do believe that there are, not all of them, and I'm not saying the vast majority, but there's too many of these accusations that are politically motivated. There's too many of these accusations that folks, men or women, use against innocent people to settle scores and gain power. Folks, we saw this in the recent Senate race down in Alabama. We saw this, where the left was using these accusations against Roy Moore, and the more, this isn't a pun, the more investigations that are going on and these accusations being investigated, the more they're falling apart. But the left, the accusation is enough for guilty. It's enough. Matter of fact, One American News Network was reporting this morning that Gloria Allridge had a fund where she was paying women to accuse the president. Not paying just for the stories, but paying women to come forward and accuse the president of sexual harassment. You know, and this is something I'm still looking into. Daily Wire and I think Daily Signal's both reporting this story. And it's, if these lawyers that are doing this, they need to be held accountable. Matter of fact, I think they need to have their license revoked. They really do. But this Me Too movement is oppressive to the truth. That's what I want to get at in this point. Progressives don't see government regulations as being oppressive. They don't see government overreach as being oppressive. They don't see any of the problems with democracy and mob rule being oppressive. They don't see any problem with that, and they don't see how this Me Too movement is actually the ones that it's so oppressive to the truth that half the time the truth isn't even found out. It's not even found out, and this is a shame here in America. It really is. I think Americans are better than this. The American system believes in equal justice. The leftist system wants to punch up at the powerful oppressors and not punch down at the oppressed. Evidence doesn't matter. Power relationships do. Once upon a time, politicians were brought down for immoral behavior, but our current culture doesn't believe in sexual morality. Instead, all sexual behavior is considered on or is conditional on consent, and consent is conditional on power. The Me Too movement's moral panic is lack of consent, and lack of consent is demonstrated by the power relationship between two people rather than by an independent evidence. And again, we go back to the groupie things with the musicians. Or we go back to actresses that throw themselves at these casting directors and stuff like that because they want to break into Hollywood. So they're using their femininity and their sexuality to do that. And I'm not saying all of them are doing it. But you can't tell me none of them are doing it. You can't tell me that. And the trouble with hinging everything on consent, especially in cases of verbal exchanges where no physical actions took place, is that the accuser's feelings are the only evidence and indictment. I felt afraid. I felt hurt. I felt out of control. These feelings can be real, but the accusation based on subjective feelings can't be the only evidence of guilt. Otherwise, the accuser becomes judge, jury, and executioner. Take the Franks case again. Two female staffers were upset about Frank's alleged proposal to have them act as surrogates for his wife, who was unable to have children because they weren't sure whether he was asking about impregnating the women through sexual intercourse or in vitro fertilization. Representative Frank's previous two children had been conceived through vitro fertilization. It's also widely implausible that Frank was proposing to pay them $5 million with the knowledge of his wife to sleep with them. But it doesn't matter what Frank's meant. It only mattered that his accusers thought what he could have meant. That's how Washington, D.C. aide was once fired for saying niggardly. And this, man, I heard this phrase way back in the 2000s with Rush Limbaugh. And a lot of people get upset when you use that word niggardly. And all it means is you're real tight with your money. You're really, you're not frivolous with your money. That's all that means. And that's the problem with believe all women. Sometimes the accuser is telling her truth, not the truth. And there's a huge difference there, folks, between the actual truth and what someone perceives to be the truth or what someone wants the truth to be. That's why we do investigations. That's why we try to investigate this. And the other thing is, you got these, and we'll go back to the Roy Moore again. 40 years he was in the public eye. 40 years he was running campaigns. Not one single accusation of sexual harassment had ever been brought up until he ran for the U.S. Senate seat in Alabama. And if you don't question the validity of the accusations after 40 years, and you just go on, well, they accused him, so he must have. Well, shame on you. I think the problem is with you, not with Judge Roy Moore, not with the system. The problem's with you. In evidence-based investigations, we examine the accused's motive. In Me Too, motives don't matter. Only the solipsistic experience of the victim in her own private universe determines guilt or innocence. Rolling Stone's Jackie testified that she believed her story when she was telling it. Lena Dunham decided retroactively that she had been raped by a Republican named Barry at Oberlin College. Her publisher later ended up paying the lawyer's fees of the only Oberlin Republican named Barry. The human mind can hold different understandings of an event at different times. That's why we look for tangible evidence rather than the erratic emotional experiences of our consciousness. Me Too defenders will argue that the issue is social sanction, not criminal proceedings. But a fair society isn't just limited to the courtroom. It's the social rights we extend to other people every day. Being able to work, live, and practice in society, participate in society is a social right, and it shouldn't be removed without evidence. The believe all women line is only 2 to 10% of sexual assault accusations are fake. The statistic is highly suspect and it only refers to criminal accusations, not Me Too social sanctions. But even if it were true, how many innocent people does that make? If some innocent men's reputations have to take a hit in the process of undoing the patriarchy, that's the price I'm absolutely willing to pay, a Teen Vogue columnist tweeted. Now, I remember reading this last week, and this is a woman saying this. This is the price she's willing to pay. So some innocent men's reputations have to take a hit in the process of undoing the patriarchy. That's the price I'm absolutely willing to pay. She pays nothing. It hurts her in no way that these false accusations ruin lives. But this is the price she's willing to pay. We have gone so astray here in America, folks. We really have. We've gone so astray. Our morals are upside down. They're absolutely upside down. And this whole thing, this Me Too movement, is part of the humanist movement. It really is. And I talk against the humanist movement all the time. They say they have morals, but they show no evidence of the morals. They say they have morals without God, but they show no evidence of those morals. Because in a society without God, where there's relative, everything's relative, and you have relative morality, anything goes. Well, and I've had libertarians say, well, the non-aggression principle. Well, if all morals are relative, that goes out the window too. Because if you have something I want, and I have the power to take it from you, what's morally wrong with that? Well, our society determines. Yeah, what happens if you have a whole society that doesn't believe in the non-aggression principle, that it's a dog-eat-dog world? Well, then what? I can bring these hypotheticals up to you all day long about your morality. Because it's a subjective morality. It's not objective. Just like these accusations are very, very subjective. They're not objective accusations against these folks. And this is how the left thinks. It's not how Americans think. And thank God that there's a lot of us who don't think this way, that, it's a price your downfall is a price I'm willing to pay. And it costs you nothing. It costs you nothing. It's important for women and men to be able to speak out when they are abused. And I totally agree with this. Matter of fact, and I won't say where I was at. I probably said this before, but one of my jobs I had a young lady working for me, and she was dating this I'm sorry, he's a piece of garbage. Because he had hit her on several occasions. And I intervened. Her dad was sort of her dad was out of the picture. And I don't think she told her mom, but I seen her when she came into work. And I knew what was happening. And I even told her. I said, I know what's going on. And I told her I am going to have a talk with this young man. And she didn't tell me not to. And I said, I'm not trying to embarrass you or nothing. I said, this isn't right. I said, you deserve better than this. And I had a talk with the young man. And I'm actually, I had some folks tell me it wasn't a very Christian talk. I didn't swear at him. I just told him, I said, you lay a finger on her again, you're going to answer to me. And I probably was a head taller than this guy. And he was a real skinny thing. And probably had 150 pounds on him. And I flat out told him, I said, you hit her one more time, you're going to answer to me. And it wasn't too long after that, they got in some trouble and she left him. And she's happy now. In a really good relationship, and I'm so happy for her. But my point in saying that, where's the men? Where's the men in some of these women's lives? Friends, family, church? Where's the men that these women can go to if they have been sexually assaulted? And say, look, this happened to me. And I'm afraid, but I need someone to stand by me. And get somebody with wisdom that knows the difference between innocent until proven guilty and guilty until proven innocent. Someone has a calmer head about things. Say, hey, let's slow this down. Let's get to the police. Let's get your story on there, and let's start doing some investigating before we accuse anybody of anything. That's how it should work. In Dan's perfect world, that's how it should work. That it should be brought up to the appropriate authorities to investigate it. And then once the investigation has concluded, if there's evidence that the young lady was sexually assaulted, then they proceed to arrest. They don't harass people just on the accusation, like this Me Too movement. So I'm glad not all Americans think this way, like the Me Too movement. It's important for women and men to be able to speak out when they are abused. Their accusations can be the grist for investigations, and they can warn others to be cautious in their dealings with the accused. But guilty by association, or guilty by accusation, could never become the norm. Many of the Me Too women have been victimized. They deserve our sympathy, but none of us wants to live in a society where our lives can be destroyed without recourse at any moment, and that's the world Me Too is taking us into. It's why we should start doing exactly what Me Too doesn't want us to do. Don't believe all women are men. Ask questions, search for the truth. So you're not guilty by accusation. And I may have misspoke in the beginning there, guilty by association. Guilty by accusation. We should never, ever be this way. And this brings me to this, I know I'm a little over today, but this brings me to this article about Kafka trapping. Beware of Kafka trapping. And this is a real term. The term Kafka, and this is by Wendy McElroy, August 14, 2014, over at the thedailybell.com. The term Kafka trapping describes a logical fallacy that is popular within gender feminism, radical politics, and other ideologies of victimhood. It occurs when you are accused of a thought crime such as sexism, racism, or homophobia. You respond with an honest denial, which is then used to further confirm your guilt. You are now trapped in a circular and unfalsifiable argument. No one who is accused can be innocent because the structure of the Kafka trapping precludes that possibility. And this, she goes on the article, this term derives from the Frank Kafka's novel, The Trial, in which a nondescript bank clerk named Joseph K. is arrested. No charges ever revealed to the character or to the reader. Joseph is prosecuted by a bizarre and tyrannical court of unknown authority, and he is doomed by impenetrable red tape. In the end, Joseph is abducted by two strange men and implicitly executed by being stabbed through the heart. The trial is Kafka's comment on totalitarian governments, like the Soviet Union, in which justice is twisted into a bitter, horrifying parody of itself and serves only those in charge. These people in the Me Too movement are looking to gain power over somebody else. Again, sexual harassment, sexual assault should not be and never should be tolerated, period. But neither should be false accusations should be tolerated, period, in a polite society. And if you're one of the men or women that do this, and this is mostly women that do this, shame on you. Now, if you were actually sexually harassed or sexually abused, like rape or something like that, go to the authorities. And again, if you're afraid to go to the authorities, I would hope, it would be my ardent prayer that you have either a strong female or male acquaintance that you can trust. And you can say, this happened to me. I need help. I'm afraid. That's the kind of society I want to live in. I don't want to live in this Kafka trapping society where they're trying to gain power over you. That's no sort of society anybody should want. But that's exactly what we're getting here. Now, this here, Tucker Carlson, great guy, I like him. Sexual harassment charges being used against innocent people to settle scores and gain power. And this is by Craig Bannister over at CNS News. The noble effort to eliminate sexual harassment has turned into something dark and menacing, Tucker Carlson warned Thursday, commenting on PBS host Tavis Smiley's firing. On his Fox News Channel program, Carlson said that Smiley's politics are irrelevant to the charges being levied against him. For what it's worth, Travis Smiley has never said anything we agree with politically, but that's not the point. The point is what began as a noble effort to eliminate sexual harassment from American life, an effort to agree with vehemently, is rapidly turning into something dark and menacing. Carlson warned that allegations are now being made against innocent people to gain revenge and political power. But it's not just for political figures should be worried, Carlson said. The rest of the country looks on bewildered and afraid, unsure of what the new rules are, but certain of the punishment for violating them. It's grotesque. Imagine if you were accused of something by someone whose name you didn't know, or misled you couldn't remember, or a misdeed you couldn't remember or didn't commit. How would you respond to that? And again, I warn people about this. I warned them way back last year when I was talking about this Kafka trapping. I bring this up all the time. Matter of fact, sometimes in my comments on social media, I said, quit trying to Kafka trap me. And I said, you need to prove your accusation. You brought the accusations, you prove them. I'm neither going to confirm nor deny them. If you call me homophobic, prove it. If you call me a racist, prove it. And that's exactly where I go. And you know what almost 100% of the time happens? Because I know they're false accusations. They go away. They don't pursue them. They don't pursue them. Because you put the burden of proof back on them where it rightly belongs, on the accuser. You prove it. You prove it. And I got so much other stuff in here. Again, there's a link in there to the video with Michelle Malkin and Stefan Molyneux. I have up there, guilty until proven innocent. House bill would name those. I'm just going to go over a few more things here to sort of round out the end of the show here of the articles I have in the show notes page here. House bill would name those who use tax dollars to settle sex harassment claims. And this is by Michael W. Chapman over at cnsnews.com. They're passing a bill. They're trying to get a bill passed that would name. So far, Congress has kept all these names out of the public domain. They're using tax dollars to pay off sexual harassment charges and settle these things. This is where Conyers up in Detroit, this is what happened to him. He was part of this. I do have an article, and I'm going to warn you with the most ardent warning I can give you about this article, but I thought it was important to bring this up. I wasn't going to show it on the show here because there is strong profanity throughout this whole article, and most of it's in response to pro-gun women regularly face violence and sexual harassment. This is by Stefan Gutowski over at freebeacon.com, posted today. And basically, these pro-gun women who want guns to protect themselves against sexual attacks and have accused attackers, some of the tweets and some of the comments left on social media by women and men are just grotesque. And again, I caution you before we go over it. I couldn't read the whole article, but I thought this is what happens on social media. I talked about this last Friday, where I was talking about the humanist report about net neutrality and stuff, and brought up some falsehoods that they were talking about, especially when they said and I still can't get my head wrapped around this, that profanity is a sign of intelligence. And when I brought back, I said, since when? I said, I think we all know. I mean, most rational, intelligent folks, whether you're Christians or not, you know a bunch of swear words. You know a bunch of profanity. But I think it takes more intelligence to string together sentences without using profanity than it does with. I think using profanity is lazy. Oh, you can use it to punctuate a point. Yeah, I can use other words to punctuate a point too. Like that young man that was beating up on a girl I knew. I didn't swear at him. I said, you touch her one more time, you're going to answer to me. There was no need to punctuate that. I was the punctuation. I was the punctuation because I let him know in no uncertain terms by my presence being there in his face that this is what he was going to have to face. That's all the punctuation I need. I didn't need profanity to prove what? I'm a man, or I can swear like a sailor. I was a sailor. I could swear with the best of them before I became a Christian. And you know what the hardest thing was for me to do? To string sentences together without profanities in them, so I could talk to people in polite society. Like I said, I still haven't got my head wrapped around that one, but man, you talk about the profanity that was directed at me because I said that statement. And every one of them was proving me right. Every statement was proving me right. And no amount of me saying that in that thread would have changed their minds. And there's a lot of times you just got to say what you got to say and just move on. Just move on. So I just wanted to put that in there, that some of these pro-gun women are just being hammered on social media and stuff like that. It's ridiculous. Now, I mentioned this earlier about a Kansas Dem drops out of the race after sexual harassment allegations. And it's Andrea Ramsey, a Democratic candidate for Congress, will drop out of the race after a Kansas City Star asked her about accusations in a 2005 lawsuit that she sexually harassed and retaliated against a male subordinate who said he had rejected her advances. So that sort of puts a hole in some of the feminist ideology out there that women can't harass men. It probably happens more than what we care to think about. And then finally on this whole thing, conservative backlash against Me Too is coming soon. This is an article over at salon.com, very left-leaning progressive news site by Amanda Marcotte. Conservative backlash against Me Too is coming soon. There are Republicans caught up on this. Mostly Democrats as far as the men's go, but there are Republicans that are caught up in this too. I think it crosses both political lines. To me, conservative backlash against Me Too is coming soon. I read in the article that they didn't really touch too much on what was happening in the Democrat Party. Dems, I have another article here, and this is kind of where the Democrat Party is today. Dems haven't fully vetted hundreds of candidates. This is by Lindsay Wise, Alex Rotary, and Leslie Clark over at McClatchyDC.com, McClatchy News Service. Dems haven't fully vetted hundreds of candidates. As a matter of fact, there's other articles that I shared on Facebook, don't have them on the link here. There's still Democrats defending Al Franken, even after he admitted he did what he did. They're still defending him. How many people still voted for Bill Clinton after it all came out about these sexual allegations? And a lot of them had proof. A lot of the Democrats did not care because their politics agreed. And that was one of the major problems with President Trump. This is another story here that has a life of its own, not even based in truth, and this sort of goes back to this Me Too movement. Trump confirms, I don't know how many times he has to say this, Trump confirms he won't fire Mueller despite allegations of unlawful email seizure and bias. He's not going to do it. And there's a good reason why he's not going to do it, folks. And this is by Russia. This is a story over at Russia Today, Russia Today, the America channel of it. There's a good reason. Because the more Mueller investigates, the more it exonerates Trump, and the more bad light it puts on Hillary. That's the biggest takeaway from this whole thing. And this and again, this is one of these things that the Democrats, it's like whew, right over their heads. It's just like the regulations, the deregulating that President Trump is doing. They're so how do I want to put this? Their bulldog tenacity that they have for taking down President Trump by whatever means necessary has got them seeing in tunnel vision. And they're not seeing everything else that President Trump's actually doing. And again, I reported on this show a couple weeks ago where there's, because he's rolling back some of these EPA regulations and he's building, the executive order was like 40 years ago. Executive order went out unconstitutionally to ban refineries from oil companies from building new refineries here in America. Then we have the first one being built down in Texas now in 40 years because of deregulation under Trump. And I searched all the lamestream media sites that I know of personally, didn't find a whisper about this. So a lot of this stuff is just blowing past these. They got, like I said, they got tunnel vision. The Russian collusion is all they see. They have this echo chamber narrative that they're on, that President Trump must be removed and will do anything necessary, will lie, cheat, and steal to do so. And that has caused them to have tunnel vision. And tunnel vision's a bad thing to have, folks, because you don't see what's going on around you. And President Trump and, for the most part, the Republicans, not the established Republicans, but the ones that, think like President Trump does, he's walking all over these guys. He's walking all over these guys. And the last story, like I said, the last story I have here, and this is what's really, really funny about this whole thing. And we had President Obama last week. He was talking about, that the economic success that America is enjoying now is by him, thank you very much. And you can't accredit to him because the economy was still tanking even up until President Trump was inaugurated. So we have an article here by Hank Barron from over at dailywire.com posted today. Merry economic to one and all, or merry economy to one and all. New York Fed nowcast up to 4% growth for the fourth quarter. This has been the best growth in our economy over all the 8 years of the Obama administration. So I just want to leave you with that happy note. We've hit 4% growth in the country today. This has been the Dan Clements Show. I'm your host, Dan Clements, your Constitution warrior. Remember, if you aim at nothing, you hit it every time. Have a great rest of the day, folks, and God bless. And if you like what I say, give me a thumbs up or thumbs down. Doesn't matter if you like or dislike. Give me a thumbs up or thumbs down. I get a lot of thumbs down. If you're not subscribed to the show, please subscribe to the show. And I'm looking for patrons either on Patreon or PayPal to help support me. God bless, and we'll see you tomorrow at noon.